It's 3 a.m. and you're standing in the Sonoran Desert, and it's 104 degrees. Not 104 during the day. 104 at 3 a.m. The desert doesn't cool down the way people think it does. It stores the heat and releases it slowly through the night like a radiator. The ground is still warm under your boots. The air smells like creosote and dust. Your sensor just tripped 400 meters north of the vehicle barrier. Something is moving out there. Could be a group crossing. Could be a javelina. Could be the wind moving a tumbleweed across the sensor wire. You've responded to all three in the last week. You radio your partner. You move toward the coordinates. Your flashlight stays off until you need it. Out here, light travels far. You're 26 years old. You've been a Border Patrol agent for 8 months. You grew up in Laredo, Texas. Your father was a BP agent for 22 years. You know this job from the inside out, and you still weren't prepared for the actual thing. Nobody is. Level 1, the Academy. You're accepted into the Border Patrol Academy in Artesia, New Mexico. 19 weeks. Federal Law Enforcement Training Center's curriculum plus Spanish language instruction plus Border Patrol specific coursework. Immigration law, customs enforcement, use of force, vehicle operations on unpaved terrain. Sign cutting, which is the art of reading tracks and disturbances in the earth to determine who passed, how many, how long ago, and in which direction. Sign cutting is the part that surprises people. It's older than any technology the agency has. A good sign cutter can look at a patch of desert sand and tell you that 3 people passed through here. 2 of them were carrying something heavy, 1 was limping, and they were moving fast, maybe 2 hours ago, heading northeast. It takes years to get good at it. You start learning it on day 1. The Academy washes out about 20% of candidates. Not for physical failure mostly, for legal and language reasons. You need to pass Spanish proficiency to graduate. It's not conversational Spanish. It's law enforcement Spanish. Miranda rights, questions about country of origin, medical questions you need to be able to ask clearly in the field when someone is in distress. You graduate. You get your credentials. You get your assignment. Southern Arizona Sector. Tucson Station. Welcome to one of the busiest corridors in the Western Hemisphere. Level 2, the Rookie. You're 26. You've been in sector for 8 months and you're still riding with a senior agent on most shifts. The job is not what the news makes it look like on either side. It's not dramatic standoffs every night. It's mostly driving. You drive the same roads in the same sector for hours. You watch for movement. You respond to sensors, you check sign. You respond to calls from ranchers who found water jugs and footprints on their property. You respond to calls from ranchers who found someone who needs medical attention. That part nobody talks about enough. The medical calls. The Sonoran Desert between Tucson and the border is one of the most lethal stretches of terrain in North America. Summer temperatures exceed 115 degrees. People who cross without enough water die. Not slowly in the movie sense, fast. Hyperthermia kills in hours. You've administered emergency first aid to people who were unconscious when you found them. You've called in medevac for people who didn't make it to the hospital. You've also found people who were already gone. That's a different kind of call. You secure the scene. You call it in. You wait for the medical examiner. You write the report. Your senior partner, an agent named Rees who has 16 years in sector, tells you during one of these waits, this is the part that doesn't leave you. The paperwork leaves you, the apprehensions leave you. This stays. He's right. You find that out quickly. Level 3, the Journeyman Agent. You're 28. You're working your own patrol area now. You know the terrain the way you know your own apartment. Every wash, every ridgeline, every place where the vehicle barrier has a gap that gets repaired and gapped again. You know where the sensors cluster and where the coverage is thin. You know which ranchers will call you and which ones will handle things themselves in ways that create paperwork for everyone. The job has layers you didn't understand from the outside. There's the law enforcement layer, apprehension, processing, documentation. You apprehend someone, you transport them to the station, you process them through biometrics and database checks, you determine their legal status and disposition. Some people are single adults who are processed and returned. Some are people with criminal records who go to federal detention pending prosecution. Some are families with children, which triggers a different protocol entirely. Some are people who are clearly fleeing something dangerous enough that they qualify for asylum processing. All of this requires paperwork. Enormous amounts of paperwork. People imagine Border Patrol agents as people who chase and catch. You are also, significantly, a person who documents. There's also a layer nobody fully prepared you for. You are the first government official that many of these people have ever encountered. For some of them, government officials in their home country meant danger. They look at your uniform and they are afraid in a way that has nothing to do with you personally. Some of them are carrying children. Some of the children have been carried for days. You do your job, you follow the protocols. The protocols have changed 3 times in the last 2 years as administrations change and court orders modify procedures. You follow whatever the current protocols are and you try to do it with some basic recognition that the people in front of you are people. Not everyone in the sector approaches it this way. You learn that early too. Level 4, the specialist. You're 31. You've cross-trained into the Border Patrol Search, Trauma, and Rescue Unit. BORSTAR. BORSTAR agents respond to medical emergencies in the field. Migrants in distress, people with hypothermia, dehydration, injuries from terrain or from the people who were guiding them. Sometimes people who were abandoned by their guides when they became too slow or too sick to keep moving. That last category is the one that stays with you the longest. The guides, called coyotes, are paid per person delivered. A person who can't keep moving is a liability. You've responded to calls where someone was left in the desert with a gallon of water and a hand-drawn map that was wrong. You've responded to calls where someone wasn't left with anything. BORSTAR training is intensive, wilderness medicine, helicopter operations, swift water rescue for the Rio Grande sector, technical rope rescue for terrain where people fall. You've been lowered into a canyon on a rope to reach someone who couldn't be reached any other way. You've reached them in time, and you've reached them not in time. The ratio is better than it used to be because of improved sensor coverage and faster response. The number of people attempting the crossing hasn't gone down. The math of that is what it is. Your father calls on Sundays. He asks about the job. He has his own versions of these stories from his 22 years. He doesn't try to minimize yours. He just listens. He says once, "The job is going to ask you things you didn't agree to when you signed up. You just have to decide what you're willing to carry." You're 31. You're deciding. Level 5, the Supervisor. You're 35. You're a supervisory Border Patrol agent running a shift at Tucson Station. 11 agents on your shift. You're responsible for their deployment, their safety, their conduct, and the operational output of a shift that covers a significant slice of the most active sector in the country. The paperwork has expanded geometrically. Every use of force generates a report that goes up the chain. Every injury in custody generates a report. Every death in custody generates a federal investigation. You've overseen 2 of those. One was a medical emergency that no one could have prevented. One was a situation where the conduct of a specific agent was at minimum questionable and at maximum something you reported through the internal affairs process and then waited, for 8 months, to see what happened. Nothing happened. The agent is still on your shift. You manage around this every day. Your agents are not a monolith. You have agents who chose this job because they believe in border security as a policy matter. You have agents who chose it because it was a federal job with good benefits and a pension in an area where those jobs are rare. You have agents who grew up in border communities and have family on both sides of the line and experience the job as something more complicated than either of those first two categories. You have agents who are burning out, and agents who are just arriving, and agents who are somewhere in the long middle. Managing all of that, plus the operations, plus the reporting, plus the relationship with local law enforcement, plus the periodic congressional delegation visits where politicians walk through the station for 40 minutes and then go give press conferences about what Border Patrol is like. That's the job at this level. The press conferences are their own category of exhausting. Level 6, the Field Operations Supervisor. You're 39. You're running operations across multiple stations in the Tucson sector. The view from this level is strategic rather than tactical. You're looking at where resources are deployed across 260 miles of border. Where the crossing patterns are shifting, where the gaps are, where the traffic is moving in response to enforcement pressure elsewhere. Because border crossing doesn't stop, it redirects. Pressure in Arizona pushes traffic to New Mexico. Pressure there pushes it to Texas. The Rio Grande Valley sector has had years where they processed more people than the entire rest of the southern border combined because enforcement activity moved the flow there. You work with other agencies constantly. DA when the crossing involves narcotics. FBI when there are national security concerns flagged in biometrics. ICE for interior enforcement coordination. Department of Justice when prosecutions are involved. The interagency relationships range from seamless to deeply frustrating depending on which office and which individuals are involved. You also work with Mexican law enforcement counterparts. The relationship is complicated by the fact that the cartels that control the smuggling corridors on the Mexican side have significant influence over some portions of Mexican law enforcement at the local and state level. You know which of your counterparts you can trust with operational information and which ones you can't. And you manage that knowledge carefully because sharing the wrong thing with the wrong person gets people killed. You have a family now, a wife and 2 kids in Tucson. Your oldest is 9. She knows you work for Border Patrol. She's asked you questions you've answered as honestly as you can for a 9-year-old. She knows some people think what you do is good and some people think it isn't. She asked you which you think. You told her, I think it's complicated and I think I do my best to do it right. She thought about that, she said okay. You don't know if that's the right answer, you know it's the honest one. Level 7, the Chief Patrol Agent. You're 47. You're the Chief Patrol Agent for the Tucson sector. The senior law enforcement official for one of the largest and most complex border sectors in the United States. The title is significant. The position is significant. You are responsible for approximately 4,000 agents and support staff, a budget in the hundreds of millions, and a mission that is the subject of intense political attention from both directions simultaneously. Every time a significant news event happens at the border, you get calls, congressional offices. The Secretary's office, media, advocacy organizations on opposite ends of the spectrum who are equally certain they know exactly what you should be doing and equally certain you aren't doing it. You give the same briefing to a Democratic senator and a Republican senator in the same week. Both of them look at the same data and describe completely different realities. You answer questions from both of them accurately and completely. You're a law enforcement official, not a political figure. You enforce current law and current policy. Current law and current policy change with administrations and court orders, and you enforce whatever the current version is. This sounds simpler than it is. The gap between policy and implementation is real. The gap between what the law says and what resources exist to execute it is real. The gap between what politicians say publicly about Border Patrol and what they actually fund is very real. You've been testifying before Congress for 6 years. You've learned that testimony is a different skill than law enforcement. You've gotten reasonably good at it. Your father retired after 22 years. He comes to Tucson twice a year. He doesn't give you advice anymore, he just asks about the grandkids. You think this is its own kind of advice. Level 8, the long view. You're 52. You've been with Border Patrol for 26 years. In those 26 years you have seen 6 presidential administrations for major legislative overhauls of immigration policy, 3 significant surges in crossing volume, 2 periods of major staffing crisis, 1 global pandemic that changed everything about how processing and detention operated, and enough policy reversals that the training updates alone represent a significant portion of your career. The border is not a problem that has been solved in the time you've been working it. You knew this going in. Your father knew this. Everyone in this agency knows this. The border is a condition. It's a geographic and economic and political reality that is managed, not resolved, managed well or managed poorly, but never finished. You think about specific faces. The people you found in the desert who were still alive and the ones who weren't. The agent whose conduct you reported and whose career continued anyway. The families processed through your stations who were fleeing things you wouldn't wish on anyone and the ones who were part of networks that were genuinely dangerous. The ranchers who called you at 4 a.m. because someone was in distress on their property, every single time, regardless of what they thought about immigration policy, because that's who they were. Ruiz retired last year, 16 years when you met him. 38 by the end. At his retirement party he said, "The job is always going to ask more than you have. The question is whether you still have something left." You're 52. You have something left. Not unlimited, not what you had at 26 standing in the Sonoran Desert at 3 a.m. watching for movement. Something different, slower, more aware of what it costs and what it's worth. You drive the same roads you drove in your first year, different truck. Same roads, the desert looks the same. The sensor trips. You radio your partner. You move toward the coordinates.